Hi, and welcome back to Gender Studies. This week we're going to explore gender organizational communication. Now we have so far been looking at gender at the personal level, you and your family and your friends. And we have just begun looking outside of our familiar, area of our personal life with education. And now we're going to move with a formal organization, and that's your workplace. So how is gender accounted for in the workplace versus our personal experience? Now we're going to consider the formal and informal means at the workplace that can result in these inequitable or more equitable treatment. We'll see. And lastly, we're going to consider the means to reduce discrimination. So let's, get started here, and we're going to get right to it. Gender stereotypes in the workplace. We're going to start there. Social expectations of sexes influence on how we treat people in professional contexts, and we're going to start with the stereotypes of women. Now, women in the workplace are often stereotyped into one of four stereotyped categories. Now, these are generalized, so let's look at them individually. The first stereotype category we're going to look at is what's known as the sex object. The sex object stereotype defines a woman's value by her sexual attractiveness, perceiving women based on their appearance rather than their qualities. It's probably worth noting that those of you watching who are women probably know that. Those of us who are men probably don't know that. And that's an important distinction. Federal laws forbid discrimination based on sex, sexual orientation, race, national origin, age, disability, and religion. Now, there are some qualities that are considered bona fide occupational requirements. But this stereotyping contributes to the sexual harassment of women and members of the LGBTQ community. Now, the second stereotype is one that's known as mother. Now, this stereotype of women as mother has a figurative and literal form. The figurative form is expressed when others expect women to take care of everyone. This stereotype also leads to the segregation of women employees into positions of providing support and caring for others, such as the clerical and service positions. The literal form of mothers is employees who are also mothers. These women are perceived as less serious. They are less likely to be hired or promoted and are offered lower salaries. Usually because they're not viewed as being serious enough because they can't stay at work all the time. They're going to be off having babies. Fatherhood tends to benefit male workers who are seen as more committed to earning an income. The term maternal wall refers to unexamined assumptions held by co-workers and superiors about how women will behave at work after they become mothers. They can't be fully committed to the job. They've got children. Well, so do men. Okay, now the third stereotype, the child. This stereotype sees children as a child or a pet, cute, but not to be taken seriously. And again, men may not get this. Women probably do. Women are assumed to need the protection of adults. Often stereotyping women as children is justified as protecting women from the harsh realities of the real world. Really. One example of this is the obstacles of women serving in law enforcement. Now, the next stereotype is not a very flattering one either. Iron Maiden. Stereotyping a woman who is ambitious, directive, competitive, and sometimes tough as an Iron Maiden defines a woman with these qualities as competent but unlikable because they are unfeminine. It is a compliment to call a male worker ambitious, but not necessarily a compliment when referring to women. Now, next we're going to just touch on, again, the same sort of categorizing, but what categories of stereotypes for men? Men in the workplace are often stereotyped in ways that reflect cultural views of masculinity and affect how men are perceived and treated. The first one we'll look at is what's known as the sturdy oak. The sturdy oak is self-sufficient pillar of strength. With this view, men may rule out consulting others for advice or assisting potentially, resulting in a faulty thinking. Now, it also puts pressure on men to be overachievers, that if that's not their strength, they're stuck. A second one we can look at is what's known as the fighter. Men are supermen, like warriors who go into battle either literally or metaphorically. Fighters should be aggressive and win at all costs. There's no room to be less than fully committed. Men who ask for parental leave can face hostility for not putting their career first. Men are increasingly resisting this pressure, mind you. The third stereotype is one we've heard numerous times throughout the course, and it's known as the breadwinner. One of the strongest stereotypes of men is that of the breadwinner. It's the reason they are often paid more than women, but also why they are expected to put work ahead of family time. Men who tie their identity and worth to earning power are in danger in a culture where gender roles are evolving. Okay, so we've touched basically on the gender roles, stereotype for men and women, but what about non-binary gendered people in organizations? Lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans workers are often met with hostility for challenging gender in the workplace, and they may have fewer legal protections. Now, that is more true in the States. It's still not quite that way in Canada. We have better protections for things like this. Performing non-binary gender, like wearing something outside the norm, can risk hostility by colleagues. Eligibility for promotions and jobs itself can be limited as a result. There are no consistent federal protections for sexual orientation and gender identity and expression in the U.S. Canada does have, and you can repeat it with me, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Human Rights Code to protect all citizens. Narrow gender stereotypes limits the potential for all workers. We're now going to move into the masculine norms in professional life. Now, norms, this is a term that's used in sociology. It certainly applies to gender studies, where norms are the socially accepted rules of behavior. Norms can be formal, like in laws. You break the law by speeding, a police will pull you over and give you a ticket. That's a formal norm. Or informal norms, such as brushing your teeth, or I wear shorts all year round, so having shorts in the winter is a good indicator of what a norm is when people look at you and go, "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" No, it's just that I don't feel I want to wear pants and I'm comfortable in shorts. So it's an informal norm, but it doesn't have a law associated with it. So in the professional arena, the workplace, there are also norms, and they are both informal and formal. So we're going to look at the masculine norms in the professional life. And because men have historically dominated institutional life from stockyards to factories to corporations, masculine norms in professional life are infused in the workplace. And we're going to look at two of these masculine norms in particular. The first is traditional masculine images of leaders. The communication skills developed in a masculine speech communities are often associated with management and leadership skills. So these skills include assertiveness, independence, competitiveness, and confidence. And there are some gender differences on how individuals work, including leadership. Men tend to find having authority intrinsically rewarding, whereas feminine communicators should become proficient complying with masculine norms. So they need to adapt the masculine communicator's role. and that masculine communicators should develop skills in collaboration and support. In fact, the most effective leadership styles are those that blend relationship building with instrumental qualities. And then the second we'll look at is the traditional masculine norms for the career paths. Now, when we think in those terms, we tend to think of careers as linear. You start here, you move here, you move here, and you move there. That we start at an entry point and we work our way up to the ladder. That's kind of like what we would expect. We also think of them as being full-time jobs. But this assumption reflects the social relations of a previous era. Workers often want organizations to have more flexible schedules and policies to accommodate family and life choices that are not consistent with full-time linear model. Now, that would include things like flexible hours, on-site childcare, part-time work, and more flexible overall career paths. Recent research shows that women who work outside the home are as happy and healthy as stay-at-home moms, and among single mothers, more so. Children of working mothers are just as advanced academically, emotionally balanced, and socially adjusted as those of stay-at-home mothers. When mothers who leave paid work to care for children attempt to return, they can run into many obstacles. Now, like norms, organizations have formal and informal practices of gendered patterns. On a smaller scale, these practices are like society norms, only they're workplace specific. And we're going to begin with the more formal practices. And one of those practices is leave policies. Now, this is where we're quite different from the US. In the US, the Family and Medical Leave Act, that's the FMLA, states that employees can take up to 12 weeks of unpaid leave to care for a new baby or sick family member. In 2010, this was extended to workers in same-sex relationships who needed time to care for a partner's child. However, FMLA covers only about 60% of employees in the United States. Some states have enacted some generous family laws, but since FMLA does not require that employers pay employees on leave, many workers cannot afford to take the leave. The United States is the only high-income country with one of few countries in the world, in general, that does not provide guaranteed paid family leave policy. The United States shares this distinction with Oman, Papua New Guinea, and Tonga. In Canada, though, we have the unemployment insurance maternity benefits that can be paid for a maximum period of 15 weeks. You cannot receive EI maternity benefits beyond 17 weeks after the expected or actual week of the child's birth, whichever of the two is later. EI maternity benefits are payable only to the biological mother who was unable to work because she is pregnant or recently given birth. To receive maternity benefits, you need to prove your pregnancy by signing a statement declaring an expected due date and the actual date of birth. EI parental benefits can be paid for a maximum period of 35 weeks. Payments must be made within 52 weeks of the week your child is born or the week your child is placed in your care for adoption, if that's the case. EI parental benefits are payable only to the biological adoptive parents while they are caring for the newborn or newly adopted child. To receive parental benefits, you must sign a statement declaring the newborn's date of birth and when when the adoption will take place, and the child's date of placement for the purposes of the adoption, and the name and the address of the adoption authority. So in Canada, we certainly provide a more robust approach, I think. Now, if we are going to move into the work schedules and how do they play out, well, rigid work schedules are another reflection of outdated career models. This model doesn't accommodate two-worker or single-parent families with young children. Women are more likely than men to take off work in order to provide childcare. Providing more leave time and flexible working hours can actually save employers money by boosting workers' productivity, increasing morale, and reducing turnover. A nursing home in Sweden reduced work hours without reducing pay and saw an increase in productivity. Now we're going to look at some of the informal practices, and we'll start with the unwelcoming environment for women. Even when used unintentionally, language related to sports, sexuality, and the military may bind men into a masculine community which some women feel very unwelcomed in. Check the examples in your textbook. There's several there. There is what's known as an informal network. The informal network, or it's also been used to be known as the old boys network, and it's comprised of predominantly male members. Hiring and promotion decisions are often made through this informal communication within these networks. Informal networks are made up of people who see themselves as similar, which can create barriers for coworkers who are not like the people in that group. Women, people of color, and gender non-conforming workers may avoid informal networks or lose out on key sources of information and support. Now, in addition, in workplaces, there's often an element of mentoring where one worker will help a new member get acclimatized to the work environment. So mentoring relationships is another element we can look at within organizational communication. A mentor is an experienced person who helps guide the development of a less experienced person. Women and minorities are less likely to have a mentor that have mentors that are not white and not men. Reasons for the lower number of mentors for minorities and women include, well, there's fewer women and minorities working in senior positions, which results in less opportunity for new female and or minority employees to be mentored. Men are sometimes reluctant to mentor young women for fear of gossip about sexual relations, and they assume women are less serious about their careers, or they may feel less comfortable with women than with men. Some women have informed their own networks to compensate and provide women with support and a sense of belonging within other professionals. Now, another challenge within workplace is bullying, which is repeatedly acting towards another person in a way that humiliates, intimidates, or undermines the person's credibility. Women and gender non-conforming workers are more frequent targets of bullying by both men and other women. Men bully men and women equally. Women tend to be more frequently bullied by other women. Now, this could possibly be explained by the early socialization of girls to evaluate and critique other girls. There are two terms that we can look at here, reflected in the continued limitation of women equally, and these are more often informal, not written down, they're just understood. And the two terms are the glass ceiling and glass walls. And the glass ceiling is an invisible barrier that limits the advancement. That's why the glass ceiling. You can see what's up here to achieve, but you have a barrier. And this often results from subtle discrimination. The term glass wall, it's a metaphor for sex segregation on the job in which women are placed in positions that require traditionally feminine skills: assistant, clerical, counseling, human relations. These jobs typically do not include opportunities for advancement. Now, lastly, what efforts have or can we make to address these gendered inequalities in institutions? And again, these will be US based. As mentioned earlier, Canada has a Charter of Rights legislation that protects us. Now, one of the policies for correction would be the equal opportunity laws in the states. There are two main equal opportunity laws passed since Brown. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination in employment. The second is Title IX, 1972, which forbids discrimination in educational programs that receive federal aid. Several other opportunity laws have been passed as well, the most recent of which was the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Play Act of 2009. Equal opportunity laws focus on discrimination against individuals but not groups. Complaints must claim a particular person has suffered discrimination and focus on present practices. Recent EEOC, that is the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission, its rulings have extended protections against sex discrimination to workers based on gender identity and gender identity and sexual orientation. But these protections vary from state to state. It's not a universal US. Affirmative action grew from the need to address the weight of historical prejudice. It is based on three key ideas. The first, historical patterns of discrimination have affected groups of people, so remedies must apply to groups, not individuals. Secondly, to compensate for legacy of discrimination, there must be preferred treatment of qualified members of groups that have suffered discrimination. And then thirdly, the effectiveness of remedies is judged by results, not by just what your intent was. You may have had good intent, but the results were bad. These effectiveness will be judged on the results, not the intent. Affirmative action has two important limitations. Affirmative action recognizes that limited availability of qualified people from historically underrepresented groups. Fewer women and minorities may have the education and experience to be qualified. And then the second would be that affirmative action does not encourage admitting, hiring, or promoting women and minorities that are not qualified. Qualified means that applicants meet requirements, but they are not necessarily the best qualified. So that brings us to another element it was alluded to in the point above, and that is quotas. A quota specifies a number or percentage of some group that must be admitted, hired, or promoted. This can mean if there are not enough qualified people to meet the quota, the unqualified people must be promoted. In relation to that is another sort of category that fits. It's called goals. Goals are different from quotas, but they consist of an institution's stated intentions to achieve representation of minorities and women. There's no penalty for failing to meet the goal. Goals and quotas may work against women and minorities, actually. The quota and goal is seen as the maximum rather than the minimum number of women or minorities who will be admitted, hired, or promoted. Other institution members may assume they got in only because of their sex or race, and thus women and minorities may be perceived as underqualified. And I emphasize perceived. Now, what a lot of organizations do on a fairly regular basis is diversity training. Diversity training aims to increase awareness of and respect for differences that arise from distinct standpoints. It is often implemented in combination with one of the other remedies listed above that we just chatted about. A limitation of diversity training is that it requires strong personal commitment from the participants. Many people are unwilling to make changes, especially those that reduce their own sense of privilege. Now that brings us to the end of the chapter on gendered organizational communication. Most of you are going to work in some organization in the future, and you have been getting your education in one of those institutions. Having these awarenesses can help all of us shape and be shaped, not only your own identity, but the organizations in which we engage with may be more reflective or more in line with what society's members are in the future. We all have a responsibility. We are shaped by the social institutions that we live with in our society, and as individuals, we help shape those very same social institutions. All right, everyone. Good luck, and we'll see you next week. Bye now.